Today I will tell you a story about a mother who walked into her daughter's wedding with hope in her heart. Yet before she could even step fully into the ballroom, she was handed a name tag that erased her very name. At my daughter's wedding, they placed into my hand a tag with one cruel word. They laughed as though it were amusing. I walked out quietly, but by the next morning the lawyer revealed the house was never theirs. 42 missed calls lit my phone screen, still unanswered. That is how my story begins. If it touches your heart, remember to like and subscribe for more of our grandma life stories. Stories of dignity, justice, and the quiet strength of love. My name is Margaret Sullivan, though most people call me Maggie. I am 65, a retired librarian, and a widow of 5 years. My late husband Thomas left me not with fortune, but with steady values. Integrity, patience, and resilience. And he left me one daughter, Laura, my only child. From the moment she first wrapped her tiny hand around my finger, I believed I was put on this earth to love her fiercely. When Laura told me she was to marry Nathan Whitfield, I knew what it meant. The Whitfield family was wealthy, well-connected, and obsessed with appearances. Nathan was polished, ambitious, and, at least on the surface, kind. I saw how Laura's eyes lit up when she spoke of him, and I told myself not to worry. Love, I thought, might soften the sharp edges of wealth and pride. That evening, I dressed carefully. I chose a gown of blue lace, modest but elegant. I pinned my hair, clasped my pearl necklace, and arrived 10 minutes early at the Boston hotel where the wedding was held. I have never believed in being fashionably late. To me, punctuality is respect. The lobby was a cascade of light and sound. Chandeliers glimmered overhead. Polished marble floors reflected gowns and tuxedos. Music drifted above the hum of voices. I moved toward the reception desk, clutch in hand, a smile faint but steady on my lips. A young woman stood behind the check-in table. She did not look at me long enough to notice my face. Without a pause, she peeled a sticker from a sheet, pressed it into my palm, and said, "Enjoy the evening." I looked down. One word. Bold, centered, cold. Not mother of the bride. Not even my name, Margaret Sullivan. Only this, other. For a moment, the sound of the lobby faded. The laughter, the music, the shuffle of gowns and polished shoes, all blurred. I stared at the word. Other. A label that stripped away history, devotion, sacrifice. A label that said I did not belong, not even at my own daughter's wedding. Then a sharp sound cut through my daze. Laughter. It burst from a table across the lobby, quick and cutting, as if rehearsed. I lifted my gaze, and there, among the gathered guests, sat Victoria Whitfield, Nathan's mother. Perfect posture, red lips, eyes gleaming like glass. She raised her glass of champagne, smiled directly at me, and held the smile too long to be polite. It was not celebration, it was triumph. My fingers tightened around the paper. The words seared against my skin, not because of the ink, but because of what it meant. A deliberate choice, a calculated cruelty. I stood still, forcing my breath to steady. Years of carrying Thomas through illness, years of being overlooked in subtle ways, had taught me how to hold my head when the world tried to bow it down. I would not let them see me falter. Yet inside, something shifted. This was more than insult. This was erasure. A statement meant to brand me invisible. And in that instant, as Victoria's smile lingered like a blade, I knew this night would not break me. It would awaken me. I walked into the ballroom carrying the name tag in my clutch, refusing to wear it. The room smelled of roses and champagne. Guests posed for photographs under the chandeliers, crystal glasses in hand, faces glowing with practiced smiles. I stepped forward, each heel striking the marble floor like a warning. Nathan appeared almost instantly, his tuxedo crisp, his grin polished, his voice lowered just for me. He leaned close, his breath sharp against my ear. "Other suits you perfectly. Do not embarrass us tonight." He straightened, gave me a once-over, and smirked as though the words had been a gift. I did not answer. I looked at him, let the silence hang heavy, and then turned to the seating chart. My eyes scanned for my name. Rows of calligraphy on ivory cards shimmered in the candlelight. Every guest had been carefully placed, their titles listed in gold: family, groomsmen, bridesmaids, out-of-town relatives, and then at the very bottom, near the crease of the folding doors, I found it. Margaret Sullivan. Table 22. I followed the line to the corner of the ballroom. It was near the service entrance where waiters rushed in and out with trays. The table wobbled slightly, half hidden behind a pillar, 2 steps from the restrooms. My daughter's name glowed at the head table under soft lights, beside Nathan's. My name was pressed against the shadows, erased by proximity. I stood still, watching the glittering scene. Guests laughed and clinked glasses, voices rising with joy. None of it reached me. My table had no flowers, no polished silver, just plain linens and chairs borrowed from the staff's storage. I pulled out the chair, sat, and placed my clutch on the table. My hands were steady, though my chest tightened. Around me, strangers filled their seats, unaware of who I was. One man glanced at my card and let out a short laugh. "That is cruel," he whispered to his companion, "but accurate. Fits her." His wife giggled, covering her mouth with manicured fingers. The words cut sharper than Nathan's whisper. I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with him. His smile widened, satisfied that the knife had found its mark. Across the room, Victoria Whitfield raised her glass toward me, lips painted in red, her face radiant with pride. To her, I was not family. I was background, an obstacle already removed. A waiter passed by, tray shaking under the weight of crystal. He glanced at me, then at my lonely table, and hesitated. "Would you like a drink, ma'am?" he asked gently, lowering his voice as if he knew the cruelty surrounding me. "No," I said calmly, "not tonight." The music swelled. Guests cheered as Laura and Nathan entered the room, arms linked, faces glowing under the spotlight. I stood slightly, hoping for her eyes to meet mine, hoping she would see me just once in this sea of perfection. But her gaze swept across the tables, careful, rehearsed, never reaching the corner where I sat. They made their way to the head table, smiling as cameras flashed. Their joy was real, or at least convincing. Mine had no place here. I looked down at the clutch in my lap, the name tag pressing against the silk lining like a brand I refused to wear. A woman near me leaned toward her husband, speaking just loud enough. "Who is she?" she asked, brow furrowed. "She looks out of place." The man shrugged. "Maybe catering." Their laughter rang out, joined by others at the table. It rolled through the air, cruel and unashamed, until it wrapped around me like chains. Each sound was a reminder that I was invisible, uninvited, unwanted. I folded the napkin in my lap into precise squares. My breath evened. My heart slowed. I had endured worse, I told myself. I had buried a husband, raised a child alone, fought through nights of fear and mornings of exhaustion. I had never been anyone's other. Tonight was not the first time I had been pushed aside, but it was the first time I understood the full intent. The MC lifted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, raise your glasses for the first toast." Guests cheered, crystal chimed, music dimmed. I remained seated. My glass was empty. The spotlight swept the head table. Nathan kissed Laura's hand. Victoria dabbed at the corner of her eye with a silk napkin. The photographer called out, "Family photo!" People gathered near the couple, laughing, arranging themselves perfectly. Not one hand gestured for me, not one voice called my name. I rose quietly, smoothed the skirt of my gown, and picked up my clutch. My chair scraped softly against the marble, drowned out by the applause. No one turned. No one noticed. I walked toward the side exit, heels tapping against the floor. The music swelled again, covering the sound of my departure. As I passed the mirrored wall, I caught my reflection. Blue lace, pearls, steady eyes. Not other. Never other. I pushed open the door to the service hallway. The air was cooler there, free of perfume and champagne. I moved past a waiter balancing a tray of crab cakes, past the hum of the kitchen, past the laughter that no longer reached me. Outside, Boston night stretched wide and honest. The cold wind hit my face like truth, sharp and refreshing. Behind me, the ballroom roared with celebration ahead. The street was quiet, lit by street lamps and the steady hum of the city. I tightened my grip on the clutch. Inside, the name tag waited, silent proof of their cruelty. I would not throw it away. Not yet. It would serve as evidence, a reminder of the night I was erased and the morning I would be restored. I did not wait for cake. I did not wait for a toast. I did not wait for a photograph that would pretend I was never there. My silence was my answer, my absence, my declaration. I stepped into the night, leaving the music and laughter behind, and with each step I felt the weight of their cruelty shift. It no longer pressed me down. It fueled me. They had labeled me other. They believed they had placed me in my final corner, but they had no idea what tomorrow would bring. I unlocked the door to my small apartment and stepped inside, the silence greeting me like an old companion. Boston's skyline stretched beyond the window, glittering with lights from towers and bridges. The city carried on, indifferent to the cruelty I had just endured. I slipped off my shoes, hung my wrap on the chair, and placed my clutch on the table. Inside it lay the name tag, that single word pressed into paper like a wound. Other. I made tea, though I had no appetite for it. The kettle hissed, steam curling into the air. I poured the water into my chipped porcelain mug, the one Thomas had bought me at a bookstore long ago. The sound of boiling water steadied my hands. I sat by the window, sipping slowly, letting the bitterness of the tea remind me that I was still here, still present. Then the first call came. My phone buzzed against the table, screen glowing in the dim light. Laura's name. My daughter. For 1 second, my chest lifted, foolishly hoping she would say what I longed to hear. "I am sorry, Mom." "Come back." But I did not answer. The screen darkened. The phone fell silent. A minute later, it rang again. This time, Nathan. His name crawled across the screen like a taunt. I let it buzz until it stopped. Then came another call, then another, the names alternating. Laura, unknown number, Victoria Whitfield, even a number labeled wedding planner. They poured in one after another, a flood of ringing that filled the room with urgency, but none with remorse. I counted each one. 10 calls, then 15. By midnight, 27. By the early hours of morning, the tally reached 42. Not once did a message come through with an apology. Not once did a voice say, "We were wrong." There were no explanations, no attempts at truth, only desperate rings, as if my silence had become their greatest fear. I stood at the window, phone buzzing behind me on the table, the glow reflecting against the glass. The city looked alive, headlights threading across bridges, neon signs flickering above corner bars. My reflection stared back at me, steady eyes, tired lines, pearls still at my neck. For years I had lowered my gaze, swallowed insults, smiled, through disappointments. Tonight I saw myself clearly, not an other, a mother, a woman, someone who carried dignity even when others tried to strip it away. The phone buzzed again. I picked it up this time, not to answer, but to stare at the screen. Nathan's name blinked. My thumb hovered over the green button. I imagined his voice, sharp, commanding, perhaps panicked. He would not call to apologize. He would call to control, to demand, to silence me once more. I pressed the red button instead. The line cut. Silence filled the room. I placed the phone face down on the table. The vibration rattled against the wood again and again, but I no longer looked. Across the room, the name tag peeked from the clutch. I took it out, held it between two fingers, and studied the letters. Other. They had wanted me small, invisible, erased, but tonight the label no longer stung. It burned into resolve. They had handed me cruelty disguised as paper. I would return it as truth carved into stone. The phone rang again. Laura's name lit the screen. For a moment, I let myself remember her at age 5, twirling in a dress I had sewn, asking me if she looked like a princess. I thought of her laughter at bedtime, of the nights I sat awake grading papers while she slept, of the mornings I walked her to school in the rain. She was my only child, my reason for every sacrifice. And tonight, she had turned her back on me. The phone buzzed until it died out. I whispered into the quiet, "Not this way, Laura." Not anymore. The minutes stretched. Midnight became 1 o'clock. 1 turned into 2. The calls slowed but did not stop. By dawn, I had counted them all. 42. 42 attempts to reach me. 42 moments where they remembered the woman they had tried to erase. But not one of those attempts carried the weight of a true apology. I poured myself another cup of tea, sat back in the chair, and closed my eyes. The second hook of the night struck deep. They needed me, desperately. But I would not answer. My silence was my power, and I would hold it. I let the phone buzz one last time, then turned it off. Outside, the first streaks of morning brushed the Boston skyline. The city woke to another day, and so did I. Not broken, not erased, but sharpened. Tomorrow they would discover the truth they had long ignored. The will Thomas left, the house they claimed as their own, the power they believed they controlled, it was never theirs. And for the first time in years, I smiled, not out of joy, but out of certainty. The night stretched long, the city slowly dimming as dawn prepared to break. I turned off the phone, its screen finally dark, and walked toward the small wooden desk in the corner of my apartment. My hand reached instinctively for the top drawer, the one I rarely opened. Inside lay photographs, old letters, and fragments of a life that had once held steady ground beneath me. I pulled out a single frame, worn around the edges, the glass slightly cracked from years of moving. Behind it was the face I knew better than any other, Thomas Sullivan, my husband, my partner, my anchor. He stood tall in the photograph, a pencil behind his ear, a rolled blueprint in his hand, his smile caught mid-laugh. He had been a civil engineer, a man who believed that foundations mattered more than appearances, that the strength of any structure came from what you could not see. I traced the outline of his jaw through the glass. His hands had built more than bridges and walls. They had built the home by the lake, the place where we raised our daughter. I remembered the first day he took me there, the lake shimmering under the sun, the smell of pine in the air. "This house is ours," he had said, his voice steady. "A place no one can take from us." Back then, I laughed, thinking he was being sentimental. But Thomas was never careless with words. He always planned ahead. I sat down at the desk and unfolded a yellowing envelope. Inside was a letter Thomas had written years before his death. His handwriting was firm, precise, unshaken even in the last months of illness. The words echoed in my mind as I read them again. If the day comes when they treat you as less than you are, let the papers speak for you. Do not argue. Do not beg. Let the ink answer what mouths deny. I could almost hear his voice in the room with me. I closed my eyes, recalling the countless nights we had sat together at that desk, he with his maps and calculations, me with my books and papers from the library, the rhythm of his pencil against the drafting board, the sound of my pages turning. Silence that felt like harmony. He had built the lake house himself, brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint. Every beam carried his signature, every detail his care. I remembered standing on the porch with Laura as a child, watching him hammer the last nail into the railing. "One day," he told her, "this will be yours to bring your family to." But remember, it only means something if you honor the people who gave it to you." She had nodded, too young to understand, her small hand clinging to mine. Now I wondered if she remembered that day at all, or had she let Nathan and Victoria convince her that the house was their gift, their triumph. I slid the letter back into its envelope and unlocked the bottom drawer of the desk. From inside, I pulled out a thick folder bound with string. It was Thomas's legacy, the deed to the house, the trust documents, the will he had signed in the presence of his lawyer, Alan Reeves. The papers smelled faintly of old wood and ink. I spread them across the desk, my eyes running over the familiar signatures. The truth sat in front of me, undeniable. The house was not Nathan's to promise, not Victoria's to parade, not even Laura's to dismiss. It was mine. And one day it would pass as Thomas had intended, through me, not around me, not erased, not replaced. I remembered the last conversation Thomas and Aya had before he was gone. He had been weak, his voice thin, but his mind as sharp as ever. "Maggie," he whispered, "promise me you won't let anyone diminish you. If they forget your worth, remind them with proof, not pleading." At the time, I thought he was simply trying to comfort me, a man facing the end holding on to dignity. But now, after the night I had endured, I understood. He had known. He had foreseen the day when wealth and arrogance would try to silence me. He had armed me not with anger, but with documents, with signatures, with legal truth. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. I sat with the papers spread before me, my tea gone cold, my heart steadying. The sting of humiliation from the ballroom still burned, but now it fused with something stronger. Resolve. I lifted the photograph of Thomas again, holding it close. "They tried to make me invisible tonight," I said quietly, as if he could hear me still. "But tomorrow they will see me clearer than ever." The papers rustled under my fingers, the will waiting to be carried into daylight. It was not just inheritance, it was justice. The Whitfields had built their power on image, on the illusion of control. But Thomas had built a house on stone, on law, on permanence. I set the photograph beside the papers and folded my hands. For the first time since leaving the wedding, I allowed myself a small, hard smile. They had laughed at me, called me other, shoved me into a corner by the kitchen doors. But tomorrow their laughter would collapse under the weight of truth. I rose from the desk, turned off the lamp, and walked to the window once more. The city was quieter now, the early hours pressing against the glass. I held Thomas's letter in my hand, reading the last line aloud to the empty room. "If they strip you of your name, remind them whose ink writes the future." I pressed the paper to my chest, whispering, "I will." Behind me, the folder of legal documents lay ready, like a weapon forged not of steel but of justice. The twist had already been written years ago by the man who believed in me when no one else did. Tomorrow, they would learn that erasing me from a name tag could not erase me from the truth. The morning sun cut through the blinds, spilling lines of light across my small apartment. I had not slept, but I felt sharper than I had in years. The folder of documents from Thomas lay ready in my bag, but this morning I had another meeting to keep. Alan Reeves, Thomas's old friend, his lawyer, and the man who had witnessed every signature that still carried weight, had asked me to come by his office. His voice on the phone had been steady, almost solemn. "Maggie, it's time." I walked through the bustle of downtown Boston, the city alive with its morning rush. Alan's office sat inside a granite building near Beacon Hill, the kind of place that held history in its walls. I climbed the marble steps and entered a room lined with bookshelves, leather-bound volumes stacked high, the air faintly scented with paper and polish. Alan rose from behind his desk, older now, his hair grayer than I remembered, but his handshake firm. "Maggie," he said, looking me directly in the eyes, Thomas trusted me with something. He told me I'd know when to give it to you. Yesterday, when I heard what happened at the wedding, I knew. He opened a drawer and pulled out a large envelope sealed in wax, my husband's initials pressed into the red stamp. My breath caught. Alan set it down gently in front of me. Thomas gave me strict instructions. This was only to be opened after Laura's wedding day. I placed my hand on the envelope, the wax seal rough under my fingers. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. "And you're sure this is the moment?" Alan nodded. "Maggie, he was clear. He wanted this read only after vows were exchanged. He said it would protect you. And now, it's time." I slid my finger under the flap, breaking the seal. Inside were several documents, crisp and untouched, and a letter written in Thomas's hand. I unfolded the pages carefully, my eyes scanning the words. His handwriting, precise as ever, spoke across the years. "Maggie, if you are reading this, our daughter is married, and I fear the people around her may not always respect you as they should. If they diminish you, remember this truth. The lake house is not theirs. It never was. I leave all rights and ownership to you, fully and without condition. When the time comes, let this letter speak louder than insults. Let the papers protect what your silence never could." I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the page. The deed was attached, signed, notarized, final. The house that the Whitfields had paraded as their wedding gift, the property they flaunted at every dinner, belonged not to them, but to me. Alan leaned back, watching me read. "Thomas was thorough," he said quietly. "He anticipated the arrogance of people who value appearances over substance. He wanted you protected, Maggie." I looked up from the papers. My voice was calm, but inside fire roared. They told the world the house was theirs to give. They made me a ghost at my daughter's wedding, while claiming Thomas's legacy as their triumph. Alan nodded grimly. "Now the truth is here. The Whitfields have no legal claim. You do. The title, the deed, the will, all airtight." I sat straighter, every trace of last night's humiliation hardening into resolve. So they humiliated me with a name tag. They shoved me near the kitchen doors. They laughed, but today, Alan, they learned that their stage was built on a lie. Alan opened another folder. "I've already prepared certified copies. If you want, I can deliver them to the Whitfields' council by noon. But Maggie, this choice is yours. Do you want confrontation or silence that speaks for itself?" I considered his words. Images of last night flooded back. Nathan leaning in, hissing, "Other suits you." The laughter at my table. The way Laura never looked toward me. They thought they had buried me in shadows. They never imagined Thomas had left me light. "I won't scream Alan," I said firmly. "I won't beg them to see me. I will let the truth walk into their house on its own. I want the papers sent today." Quietly, but undeniably, Alan gave a sharp nod. "Understood. They'll receive the notice before evening." He tapped the envelope still on the desk. "Thomas planned this, Maggie. He wanted to make sure you never had to raise your voice to prove your worth." I folded the letter and slid it back into its envelope. My chest felt heavy, but not from grief, from certainty. He knew me too well, and he knew them better than I ever wanted to admit. Alan's expression softened for the first time. "He once told me," he said, "that your silence could be sharper than any blade." Now I see what he meant. I rose, shaking Alan's hand firmly. "Thank you. Send the documents. Today the Whitfields learn that erasing my name on paper does not erase my place in truth." When I stepped back onto the street, the air felt sharper, brighter. The bells of a nearby church chimed the hour. I walked past the traffic, past the strangers rushing with briefcases and coffee cups, the sealed envelope in my bag. For years I had carried grief quietly. Now I carried proof. Last night they labeled me other. Today I carried a deed that said otherwise. I looked up at the skyline, sunlight glinting off the windows of high-rises. Somewhere across town, the Whitfields were still celebrating, still believing the story they had spun. They had no idea that the first twist was already moving toward them, written years ago by a man who saw through their arrogance before they even spoke. I held the strap of my bag tighter and whispered to the city around me, "It begins today." Alan did not let me leave right away. He closed the door to his office, his expression shifting into something heavier. His voice dropped low. "Maggie, there's something you need to know. What I gave you today, it almost never made it to you intact." I froze, my hand still on the strap of my bag. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "Victoria came to see me. Twice. The first time, a few months after Thomas passed. The second, just 3 weeks ago. She tried to persuade me to rewrite the paperwork, to adjust the deed so it looked like the house was a gift from her family. She even hinted at compensation if I made it happen." My chest tightened, though my face stayed steady. "And you refused?" Alan nodded. "Of course I refused." I told her Thomas's instructions were airtight, his will final. She didn't like that answer. She left furious, swearing she would find another way. The words rang cold. I thought back to the smug way Victoria had raised her. Glass at the reception, declaring to her circle that the lake house was the Whitfields' wedding present. She had spoken as if it were truth, not fiction. Now I understood. She had tried to force it into reality. Alan continued, his tone sharper. "Nathan was in on it too. He assumed you would sign anything they placed in front of you, that you'd be too grateful just to be included. He told me himself, laughing, that you were predictable. He had no idea Thomas had already locked the documents beyond their reach." I sat down again, pressing my palms against the armrests to steady myself. My silence had always been their assumption, their weapon. They thought I would bow my head and play along, but Thomas had known better. Alan watched me carefully. "Maggie, their arrogance isn't just insulting, it's calculated. They intended to erase you on paper the same way they erased you at that wedding. To them, you were an obstacle to be managed, not a mother, not a widow, not even a person with rights." I felt the sting in my throat, but I kept my voice firm. They underestimated me. And worse, they underestimated Thomas Allen slid a copy of the deed across the desk. Now the record stands. They can spread whatever stories they want, but the truth is documented. The law is yours. I looked down at Thomas's signature on the page, the bold stroke of his name. He had foreseen all of this. The Whitfields' hunger for prestige, Nathan's entitlement, even Laura's silence. He had left me more than property. He had left me a shield. I rose again, my resolve sharper than steel. "Alan, send the documents today. Let them choke on the truth they tried to bury." He gave a single nod, his jaw tight. "I'll courier the certified copies to their attorney before noon. They'll receive the full set. Deed, will, and Thomas's letter. There will be no doubt left." As I walked out of the office into the bright Boston morning, I felt a shift inside me. The humiliation of last night still lingered, but it no longer held power. The Whitfields had tried to humiliate me with labels, with seating charts, with erasure. But today, their own schemes were exposed. They thought I was silent because I was weak. They were about to learn my silence had teeth. On the sidewalk, I paused, letting the air fill my lungs. People rushed past, strangers lost in their own lives, unaware of the war that had just turned in my favor. I clutched the envelope against my side, Thomas's words echoing once more. "Let the papers speak for you." Now they would. I pulled my phone from my bag, turned it back on. The screen lit up instantly with missed calls, texts, frantic notifications. 42 had turned into 53 overnight. Messages from Laura, from Nathan, From numbers I didn't know. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I whispered to myself, calm and certain. They wanted to erase me. But I am the ink. I am the deed. I am the truth. They cannot rewrite the first twist had arrived. The mask of generosity, the false gift, the Whitfield story, they were all shattered, and I would not have to raise my voice to make it so. The phone buzzed again, but this time I let it ring twice before picking up. I already knew who it was. My daughter's name glowed on the screen, Laura. My hand shook slightly, though not from fear, from anticipation. "Mom," her voice broke through immediately, sharp and desperate. "Why are you doing this to us?" I stayed silent for a moment, letting her words hang heavy. Then I said calmly, "What exactly am I doing, Laura?" "You know what?" she snapped. Then her tone shifted, trying to sound softer, coaxing. "People are talking. You're making us look ridiculous. Nathan's parents, his colleagues, even the Whitfield's friends, they all think you're trying to embarrass us. Do you want everyone to whisper about how my own mother ruined my wedding?" I took a breath, steady. "Laura, I didn't humiliate you. The people who called me other did that. The ones who sat me by the kitchen door, who pretended I wasn't even family, that was their choice, not mine." She went silent, then her voice cracked, trembling between anger and pleading. "You could fix this, Mom. All you have to do is sign over the house. Just put your name where it should be and no one will question anything. Everyone will think better of us. Please, don't be selfish. The word cut deeper than any insult the Whitfields had thrown. My own daughter calling me selfish for holding on to what her father had entrusted me with. My lips pressed tight before I answered. "You want me to erase myself so your in-laws can shine? You want me to hand them what Thomas and I built with our own hands, just so people at cocktail parties keep their smiles?" Her breath caught. I could hear muffled voices in the background, Nathan, maybe even Victoria, urging her on. She tried again, her words sharper this time. "Mom, you don't understand how this looks. Everyone believes the lake house was their gift. If you fight this, they'll say you're bitter, jealous. Do you really want to be that woman? Do you want me to be ashamed of my own mother?" My hand gripped the phone tighter, but my voice remained calm, resolute. "Ashamed, Laura?" I stood outside in the cold last night because no one offered me a seat. I walked out quietly while your new family laughed, and not once. My voice hardened. Not once did you come to me. You let them erase me, and you called it a wedding. "Stop twisting this," she cried. "You're the one making everything worse. You could have just let it go. No one meant any harm. They were just trying to keep things simple." I let out a slow breath, steady and cold. They wrote, "Other," on my name tag. They called me less than family in front of everyone. That wasn't simple, Laura. That was deliberate. Her silence stretched. Then she whispered, almost choking, "I can't fight them, Mom. You could make this easier for me. For us. Please, just sign. It's just a signature. I close my eyes." For a second, I remembered holding her as a child, her tiny arms wrapped around my neck, her voice asking if I'd always protect her. And now, here she was, grown, asking me to betray myself for her convenience. My answer was quiet, but it struck like iron. "The only people making you look small are the ones who handed me that name tag. Don't blame me for their cruelty." On the other end, she inhaled sharply, her composure breaking. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "If you cared about me, you'd do this one thing. But I see it now. You don't care. You never have." The words pierced deep, but I didn't flinch. "No, Laura. I cared too much. I cared so much I stayed silent while you drifted away. But not anymore. I won't apologize for existing, and I won't sign away your father's legacy to people who mocked his memory. There was a pause, long enough to hear Nathan's voice faint in the background. Did she agree? Laura didn't answer him. Instead, she whispered, her tone hollow now, "You've chosen yourself over me." I let her words settle, then answered with a calm finality, "No, Laura. I've chosen dignity over humiliation. You should try it someday." The line went dead. I set the phone down, my hands steady at last. My daughter had turned her back on me to protect her husband's family. That twist cut sharper than any insult. Yet beneath the ache, I felt a strange clarity. The mask was gone. The truth was out. I walked back to the window, looking out at the Charles River glimmering under the morning light. 42 calls, pleas mixed with threats, my own daughter begging me to erase myself. All of it only proved one thing. They were the ones afraid now, and I had no reason to be. By late afternoon, there was a knock at my door. It wasn't timid or hesitant. It was sharp, deliberate, the kind of knock that announced war. I opened it to find Victoria Whitfield standing tall in her designer coat, pearls gleaming at her throat. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She pushed past me into the apartment like she owned the place. Her perfume was heavy, her smile sharper than glass. "Let's not play games, Maggie," she said, scanning my modest living room with a smirk. "You know as well as I do. You don't belong in this fight. That house by the lake was meant for my daughter and Nathan. Everyone knows it. You keeping it makes you look pitiful." I closed the door calmly and faced her. That house was built by Thomas's hands and secured by his will. There's nothing pitiful about honoring his word. Victoria let out a brittle laugh. "Thomas!" She drew out his name as though she owned even that memory. "If Thomas were alive, do you really think he'd side with you?" He admired strength, Maggie, power, presence. He would have chosen us, the Whitfields, not a woman who hides in a modest apartment with photographs no one cares to look at. Her words sliced cold, but I didn't flinch. I stepped closer, my tone even. "He did choose Victoria, and the choice is written, sealed, and filed. His will, not your wish, decides the truth." She turned sharply, her heels striking the floor like a gavel. "You're clinging to paper because you know you've already lost the family. Laura won't defend you. Nathan won't tolerate you. And as for me, I'll make sure every person in Boston society knows you're the bitter widow who destroyed her daughter's future." Her venom didn't surprise me. What struck me was her certainty, as if humiliation was a language she spoke fluently. I folded my arms, steady. "The only future I destroyed was the one you tried to steal." Don't dress up greed as generosity. You announced that house as your gift when you knew it wasn't yours to give. Her eyes narrowed and the mask slipped. The polite society veneer cracked, showing the raw, ruthless ambition underneath. "Do you think anyone cares who owned it first? Do you think the city gossips care about deeds or signatures? They care about appearances, Maggie, and I control appearances. You're invisible. I've made sure of it." I took one step closer, my voice firm, low, unshakable. "Invisible?" They wrote "other" on my name tag at my own daughter's wedding. That wasn't invisibility, Victoria. That was cruelty. But let me be clear. You don't erase me by printing a label. You don't erase me by rewriting stories at dinner tables. The papers Thomas left, the law, say otherwise. And the law doesn't bow to appearances, she sneered. The law. As if that will matter when you're sitting alone at every holiday table. You think Thomas's words will keep you warm when your daughter despises you? When Nathan convinces her you're toxic? Her words were sharp, meant to pierce, but instead they fueled the fire inside me. "Better to be alone in truth," I said, "than surrounded by liars in silk." For a moment the air went still. She blinked, thrown off by the force in my voice. Then she leaned closer, almost hissing. "You'll regret this. We will break you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but we will. No one crosses my family and walks away whole." I stared back, unwavering. "Thomas knew exactly what you were capable of, Victoria. That's why he made sure the house could never fall into your hands. He saw you, he saw through you, and now, so do I," silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of unspoken threats. Finally, she pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, straightened, and marched to the door. Before leaving, she turned once more, her face like stone. "Enjoy your little victory, Maggie. It won't last." The door shut behind her with a thud that echoed through the apartment. I stood still, letting the quiet return, my heart steady. Victoria had revealed her true face, her contempt, her greed, her need to dominate. She thought her words would shake me, but instead, they crystallized everything. She wasn't just cruel, she was afraid. Afraid of losing control, afraid of being unmasked. I walked to the window, the city lights flickering on one by one against the Boston skyline. Thomas's words returned, not as a whisper this time, but as a conviction. If they ever try to erase you, let the papers answer. Let truth answer. And truth had spoken. Victoria's venom was nothing compared to the strength of what Thomas left behind. For the first time since the wedding, I smiled, not in triumph, but in certainty. The game had changed and she knew it. The phone rang just as the sun dipped behind the skyline. I didn't need to check the screen. I knew it was him. Nathan's voice exploded before I could even say hello. "That house is ours, Maggie. Everyone knows it. If you think you can humiliate us like this and walk away, you're mistaken. If you don't sign those papers, I'll make sure you regret it." His rage vibrated through the line, but my hand didn't tremble. I spoke evenly, every word measured. "Nathan, I've lived long enough to know that threats sound loudest when the truth is closing in. You may be used to people bending, but I'm not one of them." He let out a bitter laugh. "You think a piece of paper makes you powerful? You're nothing without Laura, nothing without this family. I'm the one who gave her a future. I'm the one everyone respects. You're just a bitter old woman clinging to a house you didn't even build." I let his insults hang in the air before answering. Thomas built that house with his own hands, brick by brick, and I stood beside him every step of the way. That deed isn't just paper, Nathan. It's proof that not everything in this world can be bought, bullied, or stolen, and whether you respect me or not doesn't change the truth. He growled, frustrated. "Do you realize what you're doing to Laura? You're destroying her reputation. You're making her look like the daughter of a selfish woman who couldn't even let go of a lake house for her child's happiness." I tightened my grip on the phone, but my voice remained calm, sharp. The only people destroying her reputation are the ones who thought humiliating me in public was acceptable. The ones who called me other in front of an entire ballroom. That wasn't my choice, Nathan. It was yours and Victoria's. Don't you dare place that on me. There was silence for a moment. Then he shouted, "You think you're clever, don't you? Hiding behind Thomas's will like a shield. But you don't understand how this city works. I can ruin you. I can make sure you never sit comfortably in Boston again. One call to the right people, and you'll wish you never." Crossed me, I almost smiled at the desperation dripping from his words. "I've already lived through the worst storms, Nathan. Debt, sickness, loss. Do you think your threats scare me? I've buried a husband. I've raised a daughter alone. I know exactly what I can endure. The question is, do you know what you can endure when the truth comes knocking at your door?" His breath came fast on the other end, uneven, almost frantic. "You don't know who you're dealing with." I answered softly, but my tone carried steel. "No, Nathan. You don't know who you're dealing with. You thought I'd stay silent, like a shadow in the corner. But silence is not the same as weakness, and I will not sign away dignity just to make your lies look pretty." For the first time, he hesitated. His voice dropped, lower, darker. "You'll pay for this, Maggie." I leaned back in my chair, calm as the night. "I already have. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment of being erased, that was the price. I paid it in full. But now, Nathan, it's your turn, and you're not ready for the bill." The line went dead, cut with a click, sharp as glass. I sat in the quiet, the city lights flickering beyond the window. My pulse was steady, my chest unshaken. He thought his rage would corner me, but instead it revealed his fear. The man who always strutted with control, with his polished smile and perfect plans, had lost it. His mask was slipping. For years, I had been the quiet one, the afterthought, the one they could push aside without consequence. But not anymore. For the first time, I wasn't on defense. I was holding the truth in my hands like a torch, and Nathan was choking on the smoke. The war had shifted, and he knew it. Laura showed up at my apartment just after dusk, her eyes restless, her steps hesitant. She stood in the doorway like a stranger in her own mother's home. I gestured for her to come in, and she sank into the chair across from me, wringing her hands until her knuckles whitened. "I just wanted one perfect family," she burst out, her voice tight. "Do you know how humiliating it was watching my friends, my husband's family, look at me with pity because of you? Because you wouldn't just stay quiet?" I leaned forward, my tone sharp but steady. "Stay quiet?" "Laura," they handed me a name tag that erased my existence. They sat me beside the kitchen door like I was hired help. That wasn't my doing. That was theirs. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "You don't understand. Nathan's family, they thrive on appearances. They've always been about perfection. The right house, the right guests, the right speeches. I can't survive if I don't match that. If I don't give them what they expect, they'll tear me apart." I straightened in my seat. "And so you decided to let them tear me apart instead? To let them laugh while I carried that sticker labeled other? You call that survival, Laura? That's surrender." Her lip quivered. I was terrified. I thought if I said anything, Nathan would think I was weak, that I couldn't handle the pressure. "You don't know what it's like to be married into a family like that." I cut her off, my voice firm. "I know exactly what it's like to stand against a family like that. And I also know this. Perfection built on cruelty isn't family. It's a performance. And performances always end." Her tears spilled over then, streaking down her cheeks. She whispered, almost childlike, "I didn't want to erase you, Mom. I just didn't know how to fight them." I let the silence stretch between us before answering. "You don't fight them by erasing your own blood. You don't protect a family by sacrificing the one person who has stood by you since the day you were born." She shook her head, pressing her palms against her eyes. "My friends, if they find out about all this, they'll see me as less. They'll think I come from nothing." I slammed my hand softly but firmly against the table, forcing her to look at me. "Less? You come from me, from a man, your father, who worked himself to the bone to build something real, from a woman who never abandoned you even when life cut me to pieces. Don't you dare call that nothing." For a moment, I thought my words had reached her. Her shoulders softened, her breath steadied. But then the fear returned to her face, stronger than her love. She stood abruptly, shaking her head. "I can't, Mom. Not now, not with all eyes on us. Please, just sign the papers. Make it easier. If you love me, you'll do this one thing." I felt my chest tighten, but my reply was unwavering. "If I love you, Laura, I will not let you grow into the kind of woman who believes love means erasing her mother. Perfection isn't worth your soul, and I won't help you trade it." Her tears fell harder, but she turned away, reaching for the door. I called after her, calm but cutting. The shame you feel isn't because of me. It's because you've mistaken cruelty for class, and one day you'll see it. She froze for a heartbeat, her hand on the knob. Then without a word, she opened the door and walked out. The click of the latch echoed like a final verdict. I sat back, steady but burning inside. My daughter had chosen their approval over her own mother. The girl I raised, the one I protected, had turned her back. And yet, even in that moment, I knew this wasn't the end. Because shame built on lies always cracks. And when it does, she'll remember my words. For now, though, I was alone. Alone, but unbroken. Alan Reeves kept his promise. By noon the next day, he had already sent certified copies of Thomas's will and the sealed addendum to the Whitfield family's attorney. Within hours, the news traveled through Boston's tight-knit legal circles like fire catching dry paper. The truth was no longer a whisper, shared in private meetings. It became a fact stamped on legal records. The Sullivan Lake House, the so-called wedding gift that Nathan and Victoria paraded as proof of their wealth, belonged entirely, indisputably, to me, Margaret Sullivan. No loopholes, no gray areas, no signatures left to forge. I sat in my small apartment, the city humming beyond my window, when Alan called. His voice carried a mix of professionalism and satisfaction. "It's done, Maggie." Every lawyer who matters in Boston now knows. The Whitfields can't spin their way out of this. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. I didn't gloat, I didn't cheer. I simply felt the weight of years of silence begin to loosen from my chest. "Thank you, Alan," I said, "for honoring Thomas. For honoring the truth." At that same hour, chaos erupted inside the Whitfield mansion. I wasn't there, but word of what happened reached me through people who had seen or heard it. Nathan had been in his study, a glass of Bordeaux in hand, when their attorney confirmed the contents of the will. His hand tightened around the stem until the glass shattered, crimson spilling down his wrist like blood. "This is impossible," he barked. "She's bluffing." That house was ours. Everyone knows it. But the attorney only shook his head. "It's not a matter of opinion, mister." Whitfield. The documentation is solid. The deed has been Margaret Sullivan's since the trust finalized. Your claim has no legal standing. Victoria, usually poised as a queen, collapsed into a chair. Her face, so carefully maintained with makeup and pride, drained of color. "Do you have any idea what this means?" she hissed at her son-in-law. "Our reputation, our name. Every person at that wedding will know we flaunted something that was never ours. They'll laugh." Nathan slammed his fist against the desk, sending papers flying. "Then we'll make her sign. We'll make her cave." But even as he raged, Victoria knew better. The Whitfields thrived on image, on perfection, and now the image had cracked. In Boston, reputations traveled faster than truth itself. Business partners whispered. Old allies began to distance themselves. And all of it, all their carefully crafted facade, had been undone not by another family of equal power, but by me. A widow they labeled as irrelevant. Alan told me later that a junior partner at Whitfield Capital had already begun floating resumes elsewhere, sensing instability. Even the foundation events Victoria loved to host were suddenly at risk. No one wanted to be photographed beside a sinking ship. That night, my phone lit up again. More missed calls. This time, not just Laura, but numbers from Nathan, from Victoria, from people whose names I didn't even recognize. I let them ring. Each vibration on the table was not a demand. It was proof that silence had become my strongest answer. In my mind, I replayed Nathan's sneer at the wedding when he whispered that I was nothing but other. Now the whole city knew who truly stood behind the Sullivan name. The irony cut sharp but clean. They had spent years polishing their glass castle, and a single truth, One signed document had brought it all crashing down. Later, Alan came by with updates, his briefcase heavy with papers. He placed one letter in front of me, stamped and sealed. "This is confirmation from the county registrar. The house's ownership is final. No challenges permitted." I held the document, running my fingers over the embossed seal. It wasn't wealth I felt. It was dignity. The kind they had tried to strip away with one cruel name tag. Alan looked at me carefully. "You realize what this means, don't you?" "They'll come harder now. Desperation makes people reckless." I nodded. "Let them. They've already lost what mattered most, the illusion." Meanwhile, at a dinner party across the city, whispers flew sharper than knives. "Did you hear? The Whitfields tried to gift a house that never belonged to them." Another guest laughed bitterly. "All that show, and in the end they were begging from a widow." Victoria, hearing the murmurs circle back, excused herself from the table. She locked herself in the powder room, gripping the marble sink until her knuckles turned white. She could paint over her face, but she couldn't paint over humiliation. Nathan paced in his office until dawn, drafting plans, rehearsing threats, grasping at any leverage he thought he had. But no threat could erase the truth sealed in Thomas's will. And me? I sat in my quiet apartment, sipping tea, watching the skyline flicker under the night. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen, not by their approval, but by the justice Thomas had ensured long ago. The twist was clear. One family's empire of appearances collapsed, not under scandal or gossip, but under the weight of a widow's calm persistence. And as Boston buzzed with the news, I realized something undeniable. Sometimes power doesn't roar. Sometimes it simply signs its name and lets silence do the rest. The phone began again in the early morning, its sharp vibration cutting through the stillness of my apartment. I didn't need to check the screen anymore. I knew who it was. Laura, Nathan, Victoria, numbers. I didn't recognize but connected to them all the same. 42 calls in the night, and now they started again. I set the phone on the table, face down. The sound rattled against the wood like a desperate heartbeat. I lifted my cup of tea instead, the porcelain warm against my hands. Each sip was steady, measured. Their noise was frantic. Mine was calm. The irony wasn't lost on me. Last night at the wedding, I had been treated as invisible, pushed into a corner with a name tag that stripped me of identity. Now, less than 48 hours later, they couldn't stop calling. The woman they labeled other was suddenly the person they needed most. I remembered Nathan's threat, his voice tight with fury. "Sign it, or I'll make you regret it." I remembered Victoria's hiss in my living room. "You don't belong." Thomas would have chosen us, and Laura's broken plea, "If you love me, make this easier." Their voices echoed in my mind, but they no longer cut. They revealed themselves. Fear had crawled under their skin. The phone buzzed again, screen flashing. I picked it up once, only to look at the number. Victoria this time. I let it ring until it stopped. Another call followed immediately. Nathan, then Laura, then a blocked number. Each one silenced under my thumb, red button pressed without hesitation. My silence had become my weapon. It was louder than their threats, sharper than their insults. It forced them to sit in the very emptiness they had tried to trap me in. I opened the window, letting in the crisp air from the Charles River. The city outside moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars crossing bridges, children walking to school, joggers pounding the pavement. Life went on. And in that ordinary rhythm, the Whitfields' empire of appearances was cracking apart. Alan had warned me, "They'll grow desperate," he said. "They'll claw at anything to regain control." And here it was, playing out through every buzzing call and frantic message. I imagined the scene inside their mansion. Victoria pacing the marble floor, phone in her hand, her voice rising with panic. Nathan shouting into the speakerphone, cursing my name as though rage could erase signatures. Laura, torn between loyalty and shame, crying in a corner. Their world was burning, and they needed me to put out the fire. But I sat in my kitchen, sipping tea from a chipped mug, watching steam curl into the morning light. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to argue. The truth was already louder than any voice I could raise. The phone buzzed again. I flipped it over to read the message. "If you don't fix this, you'll lose me forever." Laura's words blinked on the screen. I stared at them, feeling the weight of every sleepless night I had carried her through, every meal I had skipped so she could eat, every sacrifice I had made in silence. And now she wielded those words as a weapon. I placed the phone back down, face down once more. If losing her meant erasing myself, then I had already lost her long ago. The calls didn't stop. By mid-morning, the count had reached 42 again. 42 unanswered rings, 42 pleas swallowed by silence. I poured another cup of tea, calm, deliberate. The phone rattled on the table beside the papers Thomas left me, the deed, the will, the letter in his hand reminding me to let the ink speak. I touched the edge of his letter, whispering to the quiet, "You knew, Thomas. You knew this day would come." Another buzz, another number. I let it fade. My silence was not weakness anymore. It was judgment. It was the sentence, handed down without a courtroom, without a jury. They had humiliated me in public, called me nothing, and expected me to comply. Now their punishment was simple. I refused to answer. In their world, appearances were everything. Being ignored was worse than being screamed at. My silence wasn't retreat, it was power. And as I sat there, calm and immovable, I knew they felt it with every unanswered call. The clock ticked. The city outside moved on, and I remained still, unshaken. They had made me other. But now, they were the ones begging for acknowledgement, for a response, for mercy. And all they received was silence. The letter arrived in a heavy cream envelope, the Whitfield crest embossed on the back. It was hand-delivered, no return address, no polite note attached. Only my name, written in careful, elegant script, as if formality could disguise desperation. I sat at my kitchen table, tea steaming at my side, and studied it for a moment before sliding a knife under the seal. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery, Victoria's handwriting looping across it in ink, darker than her painted lips. "Margaret," it began, as though she had ever called me that with respect. "We recognize there has been some misunderstanding. In the interest of preserving dignity for all parties, we are prepared to offer you a generous compensation package if you will transfer the lake house deed to Nathan and Laura. This arrangement would ensure your daughter's security, protect the Whitfield family's reputation, and save you the embarrassment of continued conflict. Consider this carefully. There is no need for hostility when money can solve everything." She signed it with a flourish. Victoria Whitfield. I read it twice, then a third time, letting each line settle like poison. There it was, the truth behind all their threats and all their performances. When intimidation failed, when appearances cracked, they turned to what they understood best, buying people. To Victoria, everything had a price tag, even dignity, even motherhood. I set the letter down, staring at the neat folds. For a moment, I thought of Laura, how she had begged me to sign, how her eyes had filled with fear at the thought of losing approval. Would she see this letter as a lifeline or another chain? The phone rang again, buzzing with yet another attempt to reach me. I ignored it, my attention fixed on the words in front of me. Victoria thought she had delivered her final blow, the strike that would bring me to my knees. She couldn't have been more wrong. I stood, walked to the fireplace, and struck a match. The flame caught instantly, small but alive, crackling against the silence of the room. I held the letter over it, watching as the edges curled and blackened, ink bleeding into smoke. As the paper caught fire, I whispered to the empty room. They never understood. I don't need their money. I never did. The flames devoured her words quickly, her careful script turning to ash. The letter fell into the grate, sparks rising like tiny stars before fading into dust. The room filled with the faint smell of smoke and ink, but I felt lighter, cleaner, as though her arrogance had been reduced to nothing right in front of me. I sat back down at the table, tea still warm, the matchbox beside me. My reflection in the window was calm, unshaken. They had tried humiliation. They had tried threats. They had tried guilt through my daughter. And now, when none of that worked, they tried money. Each tactic revealed not my weakness, but theirs. I spoke aloud as if Victoria were sitting across from me. Dignity isn't for sale. Not mine, not Thomas's, not the legacy we built. You can't buy what was never yours to claim. The phone buzzed again, this time a message. I picked it up to read, though I already knew what I'd find. Did you get my letter? We can discuss numbers. Don't be foolish. I didn't reply. I deleted the message and placed the phone face down once more. Silence was the only answer she deserved. Through the evening, I imagined the Whitfield house in turmoil. Victoria waiting for my call, convinced her offer would be irresistible. Nathan pacing, furious, demanding to know why I hadn't caved yet. Laura caught between them, too afraid to stand with me, too ashamed to admit they had already lost. But here, in my quiet apartment, I felt none of their panic. I drank my tea, watched the last embers in the fireplace fade, and let the silence stretch like a judgment they could not escape. That night, as I prepared for bed, I thought of Thomas again. His words echoed. If they ever try to erase you, let the papers speak. Let the truth stand where cruelty fails. He had given me more than property. He had given me the foresight to know when to stand still and let others collapse under their own weight. Victoria believed her letter was a final blow. In truth, it was her confession. She had admitted in her own hand that all they cared about was saving face. And in burning it, I wasn't destroying evidence. I was freeing myself from their game. I climbed into bed, the city quiet outside my window. For the first time in days, my body relaxed fully against the sheets. They had thrown everything at me, mockery, threats, guilt, bribes. And I was still here, unbroken, untouched. I whispered into the dark, not for sale, not ever. And with that, I closed my eyes, knowing the war was nearly over and that my silence, stronger than any bargain, had already won. The lake house sat quiet under the late afternoon sun, its windows glowing gold as the water reflected the light. I hadn't stepped inside since Thomas passed, but now, with the documents secured and the truth spread, I felt it was the right place to end this. I lit a fire in the hearth, the same one Thomas and I had sat beside countless nights, and set two things on the table: the folded deed to the house and the name tag with that single word, other. When Laura arrived, her footsteps echoed on the porch before she knocked. I opened the door, and she stood there, her eyes swollen, her hands trembling at her sides. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked in, her gaze falling instantly on the table. Her voice cracked before she even sat down. "You kept it." I nodded once. I kept both. The paper that erased me and the paper that proved me. She pulled out a chair slowly, lowering herself into it. Her eyes stayed fixed on the name tag, the word staring back at her like a wound. Tears filled her eyes before she finally whispered, "I was wrong." I didn't rush her. I didn't speak. I only watched as she reached out, her fingers grazing the edge of the name tag as though touching it burned. Her voice wavered, breaking like glass. "I let them define you." I let them define me. I thought if I stayed silent, if I played along, everything would look perfect. But all I did was betray you. I betrayed myself. I leaned forward, my tone firm but not cruel. They called me other. They tried to erase me. But Laura, it wasn't their laughter that cut deepest. It was your silence. She flinched, her tears spilling freely now. I know. I saw it happen, and I didn't move. I thought I was protecting my new life, but I was destroying the woman who gave me life. For the first time, my heart ached more than my anger. I placed my hand on the deed, sliding it toward her. Do you see this? This isn't just about property. This is about your father's trust. He believed in dignity, in truth, in family built on respect, not appearances. He left this to me because he knew what people like the Whitfields would try to do. He prepared me. But he also prepared you, if you're willing to remember. She covered her mouth, shaking her head. I forgot who I was. I forgot who you were. I let them convince me you were small when you were the strongest person in the room. I picked up the name tag, held it between two fingers, and let the firelight flicker across it. Then I looked at her and asked, quiet but sharp, "What's my real name, Laura?" She broke then, sobs shaking her shoulders. She looked up through her tears, her voice raw. Mother. The word filled the room, heavier than any insult, louder than any silence. She said it again, whispering through her tears. Mother. I placed the name tag back on the table beside the deed. Remember that, not what they called me, not what they tried to make you believe. My name has always been Mother, and no ballroom, no Whitfield, no cruel word will ever take that away. Laura reached across the table, her hand trembling as it closed over mine. For the first time since the wedding, I felt the grip of my daughter's hand, not demanding, not pleading, but seeking. I can't undo what I did, she whispered, but I want to try. If you'll let me, I didn't answer right away. I looked into her eyes, searching for the girl I once knew, the one who twirled in a dress on the porch of this very house, laughing as her father hammered the last nail into the railing. Slowly, I nodded. This isn't about undoing, I said. It's about not repeating. If you've learned, then your father's voice still lives in you. That's enough. We sat in silence, the fire crackling, the papers between us, the proof of cruelty and the proof of truth. One burned with shame, the other shone with dignity. And between them sat us, mother and daughter, trying to bridge the space the Whitfields had carved. For the first time in days, the silence didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like healing. Laura leaned her forehead into her hands, still crying, but softer now. I don't deserve forgiveness. I reached for the name tag once more, held it up, then placed it into the flames. It curled, blackened, and vanished in the fire. You don't need to erase your shame, I said. You need to remember it, so you never repeat it. She nodded, her tears quiet now. I will. I promise. The fire burned steady, the room filled with its glow. On the table, only the deed remained, the proof of Thomas's trust, the proof of my dignity, and now the proof of a daughter's chance to rebuild. For the first time since the wedding, I breathed without weight pressing on my chest. Laura had finally spoken the only word that mattered, Mother. The lake house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. I sat at the table, the fire in the hearth reduced to glowing embers, its warmth brushing against my hands. On the wood before me lay two items, the deed, proof of what Thomas had entrusted to me, and the folded name tag with that single word, Other. I picked it up once more, running my fingers along the crease. It no longer burned. It no longer cut. It was only paper now, paper that once tried to erase me. I folded it carefully, pressed the crease flat, and placed it beside the will. Side by side, they told the whole story. The attempt to strip me of dignity and the proof that dignity was never theirs to take. I didn't need to explain it to anyone. I didn't need to defend it. The silence spoke clearly enough. It was not forgiveness without boundaries. It was acknowledgement that some wounds leave scars, but scars can remind us of survival. Laura's words from earlier still lingered in the air. Mother. For the first time, she had called me by my true name, not defined by anyone else's cruelty. That was enough. Not everything could be repaired, but not everything needed to be destroyed either. Some things simply had to be remembered. I rose from the table, walked to the sliding glass doors, and stepped out onto the balcony. The lake stretched wide under the golden light of sunset, its surface shimmering as though Thomas himself had brushed the water with a hand of fire. The pines whispered in the wind, their sound steady, eternal. I leaned against the railing, breathing, in the cool air, letting it fill me. The weight I had carried since the wedding, the shame, the anger, the disappointment, was still there, but it no longer pressed me down. It simply rested, part of me, but not defining me. Behind me, on the table inside, the phone began to vibrate again. The sound rattled faintly through the open door, insistent, demanding attention. I didn't move. I kept my hands folded on the railing, eyes fixed on the horizon. The ringing grew louder for a moment, then cut off. The silence that followed was deeper, more powerful than anything the Whitfields could say. I turned my head slightly, glanced back at the phone lying dark on the table. Then I looked at the deed, at the folded name tag. For a brief second, I almost smiled. They had tried to erase me, and now they could not stop chasing the echo of my silence. I whispered to the fading light, my voice calm, certain. No one erases a mother's name. The phone lit up again, buzzed once, twice, then went still. This time, I didn't even glance back. The wind carried the sound of the water against the shore, steady, patient, cleansing. The world outside could rage, whisper, laugh, or plead. Here, in the glow of a house built by Thomas's hands and guarded by his foresight, I stood unshaken. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. I let the light fall across my face, the last warmth of the day settling deep inside me. Justice had not come in courtrooms or shouted words. It had come in silence, in stillness, in the simple refusal to bow to cruelty. I stayed there until the phone fell silent for good. No sound, no demands, only the wind and the water. The peace was not perfect, but it was mine. And in that silence, I knew I had not only kept the house, I had kept my name,